Okay, so you're all very welcome anyway to the week 3 of the How to Live in the World on Fire course. And this week we're looking at the creative mind. We're looking at how the creative mind works. We're looking at the Buddha's guidelines for how a creative mind operates and how we can, in a way, emulate that, in a way, practice how we can kind of copy, in a way, how a creative mind works in order to cultivate a creative mind. So that's what we'll be looking at this week and next. Let me just share the overview then. So what we'll be doing tonight is we'll be having our usual review of last week and our home practice. So we will be going into smaller groups in a few moments. Oh, sorry, that's last week. Sorry, that's last week. I'm sorry, my notes are a little bit haphazard. So never mind. So what we'll be doing tonight is we'll be looking at our home practice. We'll be looking at approaching the ethical guidelines, the Buddhist ethical precepts. We'll look at the 5 and the 10 precepts over this week and next week. And tonight we'll look at what are called the body precepts relating to how we physically act. And we'll be looking at the speech precepts in terms of how we speak. And we'll do some reflection as well in that. And then next week we'll look at the rest of the ethical guidelines, particularly the mind precepts. So next week we'll look at the mind precepts and going a bit further, more deeply into it. So then in terms of, let me just get something ready here. So in terms of what we did last week, so what we did last week was we had a review of our ethical practice, or of our home practice rather, during the week. We looked at ethics in terms of the benefits for ourselves, and we also looked at it in terms of the benefits for other people. We looked at the difference between the power mode and the love mode. So the power mode is where we do to someone else an act of violence. We do to someone else something that they don't want us to do. And the love mode is acting in such ways as that affirms our basic connection and humanity with other people. And obviously what we're trying to do is move from the power mode to the love mode as much as possible. But we're also acknowledging that it's complex, and at times we will need to exercise the power mode in the service of the love mode, you might say. And then after the break, we looked a little bit at expanding at our sphere of concern, trying to have compassion and a sense that everyone acts, even if they're very misguided, even if it's very misguided, everyone acts out of a concern for their own happiness and well-being. And we looked at the home practice as well. And so the home practice for the week just gone, read chapter 2 of the book. You could read chapter 3 as well if you wanted. Move from being in the power mode to the love mode as much as possible. So that meant really going beyond yourselves as much as you can, empathizing with other people, getting into their skins. We did have this reflection last week, which was where we really entered into someone else's world and saw why they acted the way they did. And I think that's quite a powerful reflection. So I was encouraging you to keep up that reflection. If you know the Metta Bhavana, if you've learned the Metta Bhavana meditation that we teach, doing more of that practice. And practicing, just trying some kind of kind action every day. This was one of Subhadramati's practice suggestions in the book. So trying to do one thing, particularly if you can do it without getting any recognition for it, as a good way of just doing it cleanly in a way. And I also then suggested, if you could, to take on being vegetarian or a little bit more vegetarian during the week, or if you're already vegetarian, being more vegan during the week. And then, of course, I was encouraging as well to record how you get on with all this in your notebook, the notebook that we hopefully got in week 1. So that was the home practice. Maybe what we'll do before going into the groups to talk about that is we'll just have a very short reflection to arrive. So why don't we, and that'll give Tony as well the chance to set up the groups properly. So why don't we just set ourselves up and sit at ease, and we'll just do a short, maybe 3 or 4 minute arriving and connecting with ourselves. So when you're ready, closing your eyes. Just noticing, first of all, when we close our eyes, where is our attention? Or where is our experience most vivid at the moment? Maybe it's in your head if you've been on computers all day, or maybe your body feels tired, or maybe just feeling pleasantly full after dinner, or whatever, wherever your attention naturally is, whatever is most vivid for you. And now grounding yourself in your body, feeling the contact of your body with the chair, with the cushions, through your sitting bones, your lower back if it's in contact with anything. Your feet, your legs, in contact with the floor or the chair. Your stomach and abdomen. And starting to feel then the breath in the belly. In the chest. In the throat. And then letting go of the breath if you wish, and just experiencing yourself seated here in this room, in this space for the last few moments. And then broadening out our attention once more to take in the room and the sounds we can hear. And when you're ready, bringing the practice to a close. And opening your eyes in your own time. Okay, so I'll just share that screen again, which had the home practice on it. And in a moment, we're going to go into smaller groups to discuss it. So it was to read chapter 2, to practice moving from the power mode to the love mode more, if you can. You know, that involved going beyond yourself, empathizing with people, getting into their skins, perhaps doing that reflection more, doing more of the metta bhavana, if you know that practice, and doing a kind action every day, and seeing if you can take on to be more vegetarian or more vegan during the week. Okay, and recording all this in your notebook. So let's go in. Are you ready, Tony, with the groups? Yeah, good. Okay, so let's go into the groups. Don't be shy. If you have the bandwidth, don't forget, it's nice to turn on your video if you can. If you really don't want to go into the group, you can just wait here, but I'd really encourage you. It is nice to chat to other people. It'll be hopefully 4 people per group. 1 or 2 groups might have 5. And we'll see you back here. Tony will give updates every 3 minutes. So if there's 4 of you and it's 12 minutes, You'll have to move on. Maybe what we could do is one person in each group could reasonably quickly just say, right, I'll take care of the time. Okay, as an act of generosity, I'll move people on. I'll tell you when it's time to move on. You know what I mean? So maybe one leader per group, if you can see what I mean. And don't forget to remember what number group you're in case you drop out and we need to put you back in manually. Okay, Tony, roll it there. Okay, here we go. They're all streaming in. Okay, you're all very welcome back. While we're waiting, if you do want to write any questions or comments from the discussion group or from your home practice, please do. It'd be lovely to hear from you actually in that way. So please do write in. Questions are very welcome, or comments about how you got on during the week are very welcome as well. And welcome if I think one or two of you might have just joined the course as well. So you're very welcome if that's the case. So we have, so you're all very welcome back from the rooms. Hopefully that was an enjoyable experience getting to talk to each other. If you need to turn off your cameras again, if your bandwidth is low, do feel free to do that. So maybe we could get some questions or comments. I'll give you a second to type in. I see some people typing. Great. Mairead had a very enjoyable chat. It is quite nice being able to talk about these things. When I'm running these courses in person in the centre, often the little groups where people get together and talk to each other is sometimes the best part of it. Now, obviously, if you didn't like that there, that's fine too, but it is lovely to hear how other people are doing with their ethical practice as well. And with it's one thing for me to be here and talking about it, but it's another thing to be listening to other people trying to work out what that means. It's quite inspiring, I find, actually. In a way, it's a shame we just can't hear from everyone, actually. It'd be lovely to give everyone, usually on a course we have up to about 20 people in the centre, so I usually go around and let everyone say a sentence or two, and it's lovely to hear. Barry's definitely finding the love mode very helpful. That's great. Dimitra is saying it's lovely, it's inspiring to hear from different experiences. Geraldine really likes the group chat. That's great. I feel I am making up, I think you said stories, Eileen, in a very positive way when I try to get into the skin of others. Is it important or not to be right? I think the main thing is that the stories are provisional, but they're aimed at helping you to get into the skin of the other person. Don't hold too tightly if they're true or not, because invariably any idea we have of another person probably isn't going to be fully accurate, you know, but they're useful as a tool to get into the skin of other people. But I'm glad that they are useful, is what you said anyway, yeah. Amy says the home groups are a lovely opportunity. Each time I'm in a group with new people, I'm moved by how many incredible people there are in the world. Yeah, that's great. That's lovely to hear. Amy, great. And Kieran really enjoyed it. Doesn't seem to be many questions, but keep coming in. How did people find becoming vegetarian, and did it have any effect on your mental states? Yeah, I'd be really curious about that. Because, you know, all the actions that we do have an effect on us. Positive and negative, you know. So and what we're trying to do is to become free and you know, more loving and more caring, more of a positive contribution to the world, I guess, is what we're trying to do. Okay, maybe what I'll do, you can keep typing. And maybe I'll move on to the next bit of information, and we can come back to questions then before the tea break maybe, but do send in any more questions if you have them, yeah. So some of you will have read the next bit in the book. Oh, here we go, sorry, might as well start now. Surprisingly, I managed to be off the red meat for a week, and that's someone from Greece as well. That's very impressive. It was so much easier than I expected. That's great. Miriam went totally vegetarian, cooked some of the retreat recipes. That's great. Barry has now given up pork for good. That's great. So when I go on retreat in the UK, I go past on the train to the retreat center, from the airport to the retreat center, you go through these yards and like fields and fields of pigs being fattened up, and you kind of look at them and you go, oh God, they're all going to be heading down to London to be eaten, you know. So it's nice to know that you're not eating them. First time I ever cooked vegetarian, and it was lovely. Just one day. Well, that's how you start Magellan. You just start with one day, and then as you get more comfortable, you increase it, and you make sure you're eating nutritionally and so on. Yeah, yeah, it's great. Someone else asks, how far can you go into Buddhism without becoming vegetarian? Because he's resistant to vegetarian. I mean, I know like many Buddhists who eat meat, they do so for health reasons. As far as I know, I mean, the Dalai Lama isn't connected with our community, but he eats meat and he's been advised to do so for medical reasons. I have a friend who's an order member who eats meat, because whenever they try and go vegetarian, they just like get really thin and nearly pass out. I don't know if it's a medical condition or not. But the other thing to say is, just try it. I think like the Buddha is very clear with all these teachings that you need to try it in your own experience and see what effect it has on you. So I'm going to go into this a bit in ethics in a minute, but you don't do these things just because I'm here on the other end of a Zoom call telling you to do it. You don't do these things because it's a dogma in the negative sense that we're trying to impose upon people. That's not how Buddhism works, you know. What you're trying to do is try it, notice the effect it has on you, and then hopefully you see a benefit. Hopefully you feel freer and so on, and that encourages you to do it more. Great, Kieran is already a vegetarian. Good. Okay, let's move on then. So what we're going to talk about then is about the creative mind, and we're going to talk about how would a Buddha behave in a way. How would a Buddha act? How would someone who is free from greed, hatred, and delusion act in the world, and what can we learn from that? So you'll have read some stories, if you've read ahead a bit, in chapter 3, I think it is, the stories of Angulimala, the story of the monk with dysentery, the story of Kisagotami, who comes to the Buddha with her dead child. Angulimala is this fierce bandit who wants to kill the Buddha and cut off his ears to complete a necklace of ears. And the Buddha obviously convinces him not to, and he eventually becomes a monk and enlightened. So and Kisagotami becomes a monk, a nun rather, sorry, and becomes enlightened. So these are lovely stories that you can read about in chapter 3. We're not going to go into them in great detail here, but they describe how someone who is enlightened would naturally behave. They describe what enlightenment looks like in lived out experience of it. And so if we want to be happier, if you want to be freer, we can emulate these ways of behavior. One of the great questions in ancient Greece was, how would a wise person behave? How would a wise person act? And so if you wanted to be wise yourself, it was seen in Greece, well, you emulated, you copied in a positive sense. You lived in something similar to the way that wise people would live, you know, the great philosophers perhaps, or the great heroes of the age. So I think there's nothing wrong with emulation and, looking to see, even in your own friendships, you might notice that one of your friends is particularly kind or particularly wise, and you might naturally just look at them and go, what is it you do? And maybe I could try and do more of that, you know? So that's what the ethical guidelines are that the Buddha is giving. He's saying, this is how an enlightened person would behave, and this is how you can behave too if you want to be more free. So there's different lists of these, just usually 5 and 10 different guidelines that we tend to emphasize. Just a few warnings beforehand, and I'll just share a few pitfalls to watch out for with ethical guidelines. And I think these are particularly relevant for Irish people, but they're probably universal as well. So one pitfall to watch out for is being horribly good. Yeah, being horribly good. And this is kind of like, this is a bit of a quote from Subhadra Mati's book, where she talks about Bertha, who is horribly good. And she sounds terribly annoying, actually. So like I said in the last 2 weeks, it's not about being nice. It's not about being good in the old sense of the word, you know. So watch out for just being a really goody two-shoes, where we act good just to get acclaim or approval from our group around us, from our family, from our friends. So I mean, we will inevitably probably see this in ourselves, most people anyway. And I think you just have to notice it and acknowledge that that's something that we do. We want to be seen as being good rather than doing it for deeper reasons. it's said that a spiritual practitioner, a deep spiritual practitioner, wears their ethics as lightly as a flower. So you wear your ethics as lightly as a flower, which is a nice turn of phrase, I have to say. So it's perfectly natural to be concerned at appearing good, but that's not really what it's about. We want a deeper level of it. Yeah. The next thing to watch out for is martyrdom. So this can be internalized as, you know, you act good because, well, it's a burden that you have to carry without wanting to bother other people. You know, in Ireland, you might hear this saying, it's grand, I've got another leg anyway, you know. You know, so, or you know, the long-suffering Irish mammy can be a bit of a martyr at times as well, you know. So where we take on things as just, oh, well, this is my lot to carry. This is why I'm going to behave this way, because I need to do this more than other people, and so on. And it's not really the true spirit of wanting to live freely and happily in the spirit of ethics. So I don't know if people recognize that. Obviously, again, do feel free to put things in the chat if you want. The next one to watch out for, these are what Sangharakshita, the founder of our community, calls pseudo-spirituality, or he also calls it spiritual bypassing. So this is I know there are equivalent terms as well in modern psychology. So this is where we have it's a bit similar to being horribly good. So it's where we have a particular idea about how ethical people should behave, or how Buddhists should behave, you know, and we act like this. And if there's any part of us that doesn't really match that, we just pretend it's not there. In psychotherapy, I guess we'd call it the shadow, maybe. You know, Robert Bly, who's an American poet, talks about the shadow as this bag that we drag behind us. And anything we don't like about ourselves, we deny and push into that bag that then gets heavier and heavier, and we have to keep carrying it along. But actually, we need to open up to those sides of ourselves. We need to open up to the shadow side of ourselves. So if you have a tendency to be very dutiful, or to be a perfectionist, or to feel very holy and righteous or virtuous, you might want to watch out for this one in particular. Ultimately, it leaves you cut off from your own energy. Yeah. So watch out for spiritual bypassing. I think we have to acknowledge that we're messy at times, and that, okay, I really want to be really kind and generous, but actually at times I don't feel that. And that's fine. Transforming that, the first step towards transforming that is to accept it, actually, is to accept it. And we can often only really go beyond things by knowing it very well, by feeling it, by getting in there and really understanding it, you know? So that's a very common thing to watch out for. So whenever we talk about ethical guidelines, these are things we really have to watch out for falling into. Yeah. So we have to be honest and think for ourselves and keep our initiative. A couple of other ones. Watch out for getting legalistic with ethics. So, you know, an example might be you're in a taxi and you don't feel like being particularly nice to the taxi driver. You just want to dwell in your grumpiness because a taxi driver last week was mean to you. So you're going to be a bit grumpy with this one, you know, or, you know, well, I did very well today ethically. I did very well this morning ethically. I was very generous. So it's okay now if I'm a bit unethical and I'm a bit greedy, you know. So you're kind of totting it all up like an accountant. So watch out for that kind of legalism. And watch out for, I mean, they're not rules. So watch out for them, treating them as rules. They're actually just guidelines. And the other thing is watch out for just rebellion for rebellion's sake. Just watch out for just kicking against them because you just like being nonconformist. So like I said earlier, the Buddha's teachings, he encouraged us all to be individuals and really take them on and try them and adapt them for yourself. And a lot of the spiritual path, I think, in Buddhism is about becoming more and more of an individual and thinking more and more for yourself. So not just rejecting them because other people practice them, but taking them on after reflecting upon them yourself. If you're always rebelling against something, if you're always rebelling against a group, then you're just as much defined by the group as a group member. Yeah, if you're always rebelling against the group, you're just as defined by the group as a group member. So really what you want to be is an individual who thinks for themselves. That's so much of the spiritual life. And then the last one to mention is that maybe it touches into a few of them is don't worry if you have mixed motives, if you find yourself one part of you wanting to be generous, another part of you wanting to be selfish. That's just completely normal. You will notice that coming out more and more when you look at the ethical guidelines more fully. Okay, so there are a few things to watch out for when it comes to the ethical guidelines. Again, if you have any thoughts or questions on those, do pop them in the chat. And if you notice that you have any particular one that you're likely to be prone to, pay particular attention to that. For me, I think, particularly when I first came along, I was very nice. I remember being in the UK on a kind of a retreat / fundraising thing where we're knocking doors to raise money for India, and I wasn't doing very well. And the guy took me aside and he said, "Look, you're a very nice Buddhist." And he said that thing that I probably quoted last week. He said, "A nice Buddhist is a dead Buddhist," in the sense that, if you're going to be nice, if you're going to be horribly good, your practice isn't going to be very rich. It's not going to be very real. So watch out for that. And I think also, I think spiritual bypassing was a real danger for me. I think it's a particular danger it was for me as a young man. I wonder, is it a danger for young men who are very willful, which I was in my early to mid 20s when I came along first. Okay, so there are some preliminary things to watch out for in terms of the ethical guidelines. I'll just mention, we'll just go into the first three of the, we'll go into the first three in a moment. There are two traditional lists. Well, there's many traditional lists in Buddhism as well. There's the 5 traditional precepts or guidelines. They're called precepts as well because, for ordination, when you're ordained, they're given to you by your preceptor. They're kind of guidelines, precepts to live by. So traditionally, every Buddhist follows the 5 guidelines, and we will look at all 5 over this week and next week. But if you're ordained, typically you'd follow the 10 precepts, the 10 guidelines. Now, there's no reason, and as an ordained order member myself, the 10 guidelines, the 10 precepts are what I take on to live by at ordination. But there's no reason why anyone can practice all 10 guidelines, all 10 precepts. So we're going to look at all 10 precepts and all 5. I mean, the 5 are a subset of the 10, roughly speaking. So each ethical guideline has a negative form and a positive form. So it has something you're trying to avoid, and it has something you're trying to cultivate. So the first guideline, which we've already talked about, is that you're trying to avoid causing harm. And the positive version is that you're trying to practice loving kindness. Yeah. So each of them has a negative and a positive form like that. And the negative is more like kind of, it's a bit more clear about what specifically you need to avoid. And then the positive one is more like the spirit in which you live them out. So they're much broader, much more challenging, actually. And it's a lot easier to avoid some certain behaviors than it is to cultivate endlessly positive behaviors, if you see what, well, you'll see what I mean, hopefully in a few minutes. And they're not commandments. It's really worth saying that again and again. They're not commandments. They're not the 10 commandments. So if you have Christian conditioning, which I certainly have had in my life from growing up, they're not "thou shalt do this" or anything like that. But the Buddha is simply saying, if you live like this, you'll tend to be happier. Yeah, you'll tend to be freer and so on. If you live like that, you'll tend to be unhappier. Okay. So in lieu of any more questions, I'll just launch into the first 3, but keep them coming if you want. So the first 3 guidelines, let me just bring them up here. Sorry, let me just open my chat box. So the first 3 guidelines are, well, the first one we've already talked about a bit in the preceding weeks, so I'm not going to go into any great detail with this one again. But the first one is avoiding causing harm and practicing loving kindness. So in a way, all the guidelines come out of this. This is the fundamental, the root of all ethics. And in a way, it's the golden rule, which is common to loads of religions, treat your neighbor as yourself and so on. So it means as far as possible, acting out of loving kindness, empathy, understanding, and as far as possible, avoiding causing harm, both to ourselves and to other people as well. And as I said before, I mean, this can manifest in all kinds of ways. It can manifest in how we behave towards people, how we think about them, our friendliness. It can manifest in vegetarianism. So, you could see the vegetarianism that hopefully many of you are practicing this week as an aspect of that. You can see environmentalism, which is a real passion of mine, as a wanting to avoid causing harm, wanting to practice loving kindness. It might mean that you need to look at your work. You might need to seriously think about working for that tobacco company you're working for, or that company that makes landmines in the extreme case. Although, interestingly, in India, I meet order members who work in munitions factories in India because they live in towns where the only employment, literally the only employment, is making munitions. So it's a tricky one. So at times, it's a tricky one to work out. So really what it boils down to is seeing that other people are real, as we had that quote last week. Love is a difficult realization that other people are real. Yeah. So that's the first guideline, the first precept. So the second one then is remembering to avoid taking the not given, and by contrast, practicing generosity. So if you're really living in the love mode, you want to not take things that aren't freely given to you, and you'll really want to live generously. So really what this precept is about is moving from thinking about what you can get on the one hand to thinking about how you can give on the other. And giving is, like, if you can get into giving, it's a really happy, joyous experience. And as I said last week, it's not just about money, it's about time, it's about energy, it's about all the different ways, it's about taking people in. One way of taking the not given is being an energy vampire, where you just leave people drained afterwards. And I'm sure we know people who we experience in that way. So don't be that kind of person. Don't be the kind of person who exploits other people if you can, or and so on, because it does leave you a bit more cut off from other people, and it does leave you feeling a bit shifty, a bit one mental state Buddhism talks about is slyness and concealment. It leaves you in a state of slyness and concealment, which is actually an unpleasant mental state. But generosity, on the other hand, is really, really lovely. It's really vital. It's really alive. And we can give all kinds of things. So I remember, I don't think I've told this story, but if I have, please forgive me. But I remember when I was first working in the Buddhist Centre, Karnadaka, the man who worked with me, he gave me the gift of fearlessness in many ways. And one of the ways was when we were out walking on the street, he would stop and pick up bicycles that had been locked to lampposts and had fallen over. And when they fall over, they often fall in the street and are at danger of being driven over or being walked upon. So he used to pick up the bicycles. And I would never, ever, ever, ever do that. And in fact, when he first started doing it, I felt embarrassed that he was going to embarrass me if someone saw him doing that. But actually, what he by him doing that, it gave me license to do it as well. And it gave me a certain fearlessness to do it. So I think it's a very simple example, but it's a good example of someone giving the gift of fearlessness. And it wasn't that he was deliberately deciding to give the gift of fearlessness. He was just doing what he wanted to do. So I think we can give the gift of fearlessness by just being ourselves and living according to our principles, actually. So, and that's a really powerful thing to do. We can also give life and limb, be a blood donor, be an organ donor. And the highest gift in Buddhism is to give people the gift of the truth, to give people the gift of the Dharma, to give people the gift of meaning. So it might be that your donations you give to the centre, for example, help us to give the gift of the Dharma to other people, or people who are often a bit more involved in the centre want to help support courses and want to come in and help man the reception desk and things like that. Or it might be just living by the truth yourself actually gives people the gift of what living by the truth would look like. Someone's asked for a clarification about the fearlessness with the bicycles. I think what I mean by the gift of fearlessness there with Karnadaka is that by him just being openly idealistic like that and doing what he wanted to do according to his ideals, it almost gave me, it gave me permission to do the same without being embarrassed, because I wasn't long out of college, and a lot of my college friends were very cynical, very nihilistic actually, in the science faculty. And I think they would have slagged me off if I'd done that, you know. But actually, I could see that actually, no, this is a good thing to do, and I want to do it. And he gave me that gift of courage or fearlessness to do that. So that's the kind of thing I mean by the gift of fearlessness. So we'll come back and do a reflection on fearlessness in a moment, to take us up to the break. But so that's the second guideline. I think I mentioned last week as well that gratitude is a really good basis for generosity as well. Awareness of how we've benefited from others, then we want to benefit others as well. Okay, so we'll come back to the reflection, but Subhadra does also have a practice suggestion during the week, which is she says, over the next week or so, practice generously receiving anything that you have received, whether it is a compliment on your new jumper, a seat on the subway, a material gift, or practical help. The practice here is to allow yourself to receive as fully as possible. A simple way to do this is to meet the eye of the person who is offering to you and say, thank you. If you don't think that anyone is giving you anything, lower your expectations. Think of the waitress who serves you cappuccino or the bus driver. Yeah. So I think that's a really good practice suggestion, just really practicing gratitude and really practicing just receiving, taking in someone who gives you things and thanking them. That is an act of generosity. I mean, they are giving to you, but you're giving back to them. And it's so easy not to really thank people for that. So anyways, that's a really good practice suggestion from Subhadra. So then the third guideline, and these are the body, I haven't said these are the body guidelines because they're actions that we do typically. We'll come on to speech in a moment and then mind next week. So the third one then is the act of, it's to do with our romantic and sexual relationships. So Buddhism doesn't have any problems with sex. It doesn't see sex as bad, or it doesn't have any problems with people being gay or straight, with you being bisexual, but with you being monogamous, with you being polygamous. No problems with sex before marriage or masturbation or anything like that. In fact, I think in Buddhism, as far as I can see, there isn't even sacraments in Buddhism. So marriage isn't a sacrament, particularly in Buddhism, although you know, it is a commitment one can make to one's partner and so on. What it's really concerned with is asking, are we causing harm by our actions? Yeah, are we causing harm by our actions? And if we're causing harm, or there's an abusive element to our sexual relationships, then we need to look at that. Yeah. And you might say, well, that's just part of the first precept, really. But it's an area which I'm sure we all know can involve a lot of craving, a lot of desire, a lot of neediness, and that can a lot of our emotions, our energies in this area can be neurotic at times, you know, and it's easy to lose control. It's easy to lose control as well. Obviously, like we can experience compulsive behavior anywhere, but the thing about sex is that it's very relational to other people. The thing about romance, it's very relational to other people, and certainly I think it's very clear that a small action or a small misstep or a small degree of unethicality can cause huge harm. Actually, I'm sure we've been on the end of that, and I'm sure we've probably been the cause of that at times, no matter what your best intentions are. And obviously, it's not just about sex either. It's about intimacy, the genuine need that we have for connection and intimacy that sometimes gets thwarted or causes us frustration. And society does put an awful lot of pressure on us to have the ideal relationship. So this is a whole area that's got a lot of energy built up around it. So what we're trying to do is simply avoid causing harm, really practice loving kindness and avoiding causing harm as much as possible. And the positive counterpart that we're trying to cultivate is stillness, simplicity, and contentment. So if we're in a relationship, we try and be as happy, content, practice simplicity within that, rather than always be looking somewhere else for what you don't have. If you're married, you're trying to be content within that. If you're single, you're trying to be content within that. And if you want to change your status romantically, well, we try and do it on the basis of as much awareness and kindness as possible, rather than on the basis of neurotic craving. And it's where there's a story I love, which is of Marshall Rosenberg, who's the guy who came up with nonviolent communication. It's a way of talking that's, well, nonviolent, I guess you could say. It's very American, but there's some really good stuff in it. And he tells a story about his wife asking him, "Do you love me?" And his response was, "When?" And what he's highlighting there is that love is a verb. You know what I mean? As the song goes, love is a verb. It's something that we need to keep doing. We need to keep doing and actively loving other people. And I think that, if I remember the story rightly, it's a few years ago since I've heard it, I think this led to a bit of an argument. And he said, "You know, when you ask me, do you love me? Do I love you?" I said, and I think the answer is no right now, actually, you know. But anyways, so what we need to do is really love each other. I mean, generally, not just in our romantic relationships, but certainly I'm in a long-term relationship now for about 12 years. And what I find, when I find it works best, is when I can let go of my clinginess and just really care for the person. And the more I can let go of the person, the better the relationship tends to go. But all our compulsions are often the other way around, to hold on as tightly as possible. And the metta bhavana is a really good practice for this. The loving kindness practice, if you know that, is a really good practice for letting go of the more sticky elements of things and just loving the person as a person, you could say. Okay, so they are the first 3 guidelines. So if you have any questions on those, do pop them in the chat. I can't claim to be a relationship expert, I'm afraid. So I'll see how those questions go. But certainly I think the principles I've outlined, I'm happy to talk about. And in a few minutes then what we can do is we can do some reflection on at least one of these as well. Okay, so someone is asking, what harm includes harm to the self with regard to behaviors that do with intimacy? Yeah, so behaviors that cause guilt, shame, or bad consequences. Yeah, again, this will probably be very personalized, but I mean, one of the things I found was that the amount of, I remember being single for a while when I first got into meditation, and one of the things I found very frustrating was just when I found myself doing this thing where I was always imagining how much better my life would be if only I could have that relationship, if only. And after meditating a bit more, I realized actually I can be content while single, and I don't have to be always living in this make-believe story that's somewhere else. And I think that causes a lot of harm for people, actually. For start, I'm not someone who particularly does guilt, so I'm not sure about guilt, but I'm sure people do behaviors that cause guilt and shame and bad consequences. You know, I have a friend who has been through you know, addiction to pornography and things like that, which is very common with men, actually, younger men in particular, and it has been very, very destructive for him. And he's had to really work with guilt and shame about that. And I think maybe one of the best ways to get around that kind of stuff is to find is to try and find someone you can talk to about it, a good friend, or I don't know, maybe professional help if that's what you need. I wouldn't feel there's anything wrong with needing that, but certainly with this friend, he just started talking about it with me and with other people, and it really helped things shift and move on. A lot of guilt that we have and shame is just that we feel that if people find out how bad we are, they won't love us anymore. Yeah, and we'll come back to that a bit next week when we're looking at guilt and shame. But often when you share it with people, people go, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's fine. You know, I still like you," and that has a big effect on people, actually. Laura is asking about the metta bhavana in the context of of your partner. I knew this question was going to come, so Laura, it's good that you asked. So we do advise people when they're learning the metta bhavana not to put their romantic partner in, at least initially, because you want to keep the practice really simple. You can put them in if you're having difficulties with them, and you can even put them in as a friend once you get the practice going. But I do it very sparingly because it's so easy. The depths of you know, kind of I don't know. I don't mean to put this negatively, but there's a lot of kind of attachment to your partner. I certainly find that myself, that that can really creep in, and we can just sit there thinking, oh, how lovely they are and how good they make us feel. And that's not necessarily doing the metta bhavana. It's not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's not the metta bhavana, you know? So it is a bit more tricky to put your partner in. I find it tricky even now putting my partner in after many years of doing the metta bhavana. So you can do it. It might be that you're better off trying to do it outside of meditation either, but don't do it all the time, I guess, is the teaching. Any more questions coming in? Hopefully that answers your question, Laura. So I've talked for quite a while, so maybe it's time for me to shut up actually now. Okay, why don't we do a reflection? So Subhadramati is a really good reflection about generosity. So why don't we set ourselves up? Okay, so why don't we just, when we're ready, closing our eyes, just spending a few minutes tuning into your body, tuning into your physical experience, tuning into your weight on the chair, the cushions, the support of your sitting bones. Why don't we tune into the breath for a few moments as well? So I want you now to, if you're, hopefully you're in your, well, you might be in your room. So if you're in your room, you can connect with the fact that you're surrounded by things you've chosen to have, things you find pleasing to look at, things you find pleasing to have. If you're not in your room, if you're somewhere else, you can imagine yourself in your room. Or if you're in a room and there's another room in the house which is more of your possessions, you could, if you want to, imagine yourself there. So having a sense of all your possessions, the things you choose to have around you, things you find pleasing and pleasant. And tuning into the fact that, to an extent, these are the things that somehow define you as you. They define you as you. You're the kind of person who reads this kind of book. You're the kind of person who likes this kind of art and what it says about you. You're the kind of person who has these kinds of gadgets, these kinds of soft toys, these kinds of furnishings. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but just tuning into the fact of how these possessions define the kind of person you are or reflect the person you are. Now we can reflect that one day, after you've died, this collection of things will be broken up. All these things will go elsewhere to other people. So who would you like to have them? You don't need to get too caught up in the specifics, but just imagining other people taking pleasure in those things. It might be the pleasure of the thing for its own sake, or it might be the pleasure of knowing that the connection with you. So really focusing on the pleasure that the other people will get from the use of these things. How does it feel to be reflecting like this? So now I want you to ask yourself, is there one thing of yours that you'd like to give to someone now after having done that reflection? Is there one thing of yours you'd like to give to someone now? And if there is, imagine doing that now. Imagine what it'd be like to give that person that thing now. And how does that feel? So now starting to let go of the reflection and just sitting for a few moments to absorb the experience, particularly just sitting with how you're feeling emotionally, just letting it permeate your whole body if you wish. When you're ready, then bringing the practice to a close, reopening your eyes. And it might be that over the next few days, you want to decide whether to follow through with what you were imagining there in terms of giving away, if you felt it was a positive experience. So in the East, it's a tradition apparently that you give one thing away every day. You give one thing away every day. Now that might be different things. I mean, maybe it's a bit like I don't know about you, but in where I come from in Roscommon, in our village, there's probably boxes of biscuits that get circulated the whole way around the loop of 8 houses at Christmas, you know, each person passing it on to the next. But certainly the intention is good though, you know. So they give one thing away each day. So you might like to take that on as a practice, actually giving one thing each day if you can. And it doesn't have to be very big. It doesn't have to be very big, you know. I think the main thing is the act of giving rather than the thing itself, yeah. And also giving in a kind of a gracious way where really it's not about the gift, it's about the connection, you know. Okay, so let's take a break in a moment. I'm really curious to hear how you got on with the reflection as well, if you have time to write it in, or anything from the body precepts. We'll look at the speech precepts after the break. So why don't we, so you can type that in during the break if you want, during the leg stretch. So why don't we aim to be back here ready to go at 8:20? Yeah, 8:20. So we'll take a break for a few minutes until 8:20. Great. So we're nearly all back, I think. I'll just give one more minute. Barry would like to give away some of his musical instruments to his friends. That's great. Eileen struggled with total giving away things in your room because that are all sentimental value. Yeah, that's okay. I mean, maybe there are other ways to be generous, Eileen, and I'm sure you know you can give your time and energy, as I talked about last week. But it's also good to give away things you have attachments to, because sometimes your possessions own you more than you own them, you know. And we'd have to give them up one day anyway, you know, when we die, whatever happens then. Do put in more comments if you want, guys, while we're waiting, or any questions. So just to say as well, just to remind you, I won't go into this in great detail, but if you want to give a donation for the course, that would be very well welcomed. We'd ask if you can to consider a donation. The links are just there in the chat box. I've just shared them a moment ago. And there's a quick link there for the PayPal if you can. The other thing to say is that we're quite excited about this big retreat we're running soon. So on the 2nd to the 9th of August, Sunday to Sunday, we will be running a retreat in the centre, and it's suitable for anyone. It's an online retreat. So even if you haven't learned to meditate, you can come along. If you're an experienced meditator, you can come along. It's been run with the London Buddhist Centre, and the team on the London Buddhist Centre are giving lots of talks, and we'll be doing stuff each day as well in Dublin. But it's a really exciting event. I'm hoping there's like a few hundred people from Ireland on it, and probably a few thousand people between the 5 different centres around the UK and Ireland who are involved in it. And obviously, I know like the best thing to do is to take a week off and just be on retreat. Now, most people won't be able to do that. So come along to whatever you can do. Sign up for it and come along to whatever you can do in your day. But if you can make more time to do it, and there'll be meditations every morning. We can teach you meditation if you don't know how to do it. There'll be, if you know how to meditate, you can meditate with other people with some guidance. There'll be talks on Buddhism every evening and so on. So you might like to have a think about doing that retreat, the 2nd to the 9th of August. And it's completely free. You can give a donation if you want, like this course again. So have a think. I'll include it in the notes again this week, but do really think about it. I'm certainly going to be on it. I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm hoping that there'll be a huge gang of us from Ireland doing it together, yeah? Okay, then a few more thoughts. Miriam gives away most of her paintings to raise funds. That's great. Sam feels an urge to redecorate. That's something that's come out of the reflection. Valerie says, I got the giggles thinking they can wait till I croak it. I'm very bad at giving my things away unless I feel inspired, but I will try harder. That's great, Valerie. Think of how free you'd feel not being. Well, I remember I used to have a huge CD collection back in the day when CDs were the thing, and I was a student as well, and I used to have to lug them from place to place to place to place, and I was really proud of them. But I realized after a while, God, the amount of energy I put into keeping these going, the amount of energy I could put into keeping these protected. And eventually I just kind of let them go, and they flew to the 4 winds from in various friends' pockets when I lent them to them and stuff. And it was a relief, I have to say. It was just a relief. It was a relief not to have them anymore, actually. Okay, keep the questions coming in if you want. Okay, so the next thing then to do is to look at the next few guidelines. So these are moving into the next area, which is speech. So the last 3 were body, you might say. It's not a great word, body, in some ways, but you get what it means. But the next ones anyway are the speech precepts. So let's look at those now. Oh yeah, they're the links again, but I've shared those links in the chat box anyway. So you can see all our events on dublinbuddhistcentre.org/online, and they're the donation links. Yeah. So these are the speech precepts then. So there's 4 of these. These are from the 10 guidelines, the 10 precepts. So we're going to look at each of the 4, yeah? So the first one is, I think I said in the previous, sorry, just avoiding. Here I have abstaining. There's no real, either word is fine. I can't remember why I didn't change them to all to one or the other. Abstaining, avoiding false speech, and practicing truthful speech. So it's, I mean, for me, this guideline comes down, this precept comes down to the fact that if I know I've been lied to, it's really painful. If I know I've been lied to, it's really painful. Yeah, it really cuts me off from that person. It really stops me from trusting them anymore. It really damages my connection with that person. So I think in a way, that's all we need in some ways to talk about this guideline, but I will talk about it a bit more. You can never really, it's very hard to trust someone who has lied to you. It's very hard to have a positive connection, a deeper positive connection with someone who has lied to you. So hopefully we're not liars. Hopefully we live on the basis of the truth. That's what we're trying to do here, and we speak on the basis of the truth. But we probably all kind of subtly distort things, or tell little white lies, or you know, don't be fully open about what we're feeling. Now, you know, again, we have to be careful of appropriateness, obviously, but you might find, as a, you know, with little white lies, one thing I've taken on to do is, well, I do it. One thing I took on in the early stages when I was looking at this first is not to tell any little white lies. So that might be a practice suggestion for the week ahead. Can you not tell any little white lies this week? Now, usually little white lies, you know, when you say this to that person, that to that person, and that to that person, and then it gets really complex because you have to hope that that person doesn't talk to that person, or that person doesn't talk to that person, and you might be found out. And also, usually the reason for little white lies is just to make things a bit easier, actually, just for social lubrication a lot of the time. So personally, I found it a real relief, actually, when I just decided I'm just not going to tell little white lies anymore. And it was actually very, very freeing. It was very, very freeing, because actually what you could do then is just be yourself with people, not having to worry about what you'd said previously, not having to worry about the stories that you'd already gotten into and had to keep going, you know? So I really would encourage you to try that out this week. And I think you will, like me, find it a relief, actually. And yeah, so that's little white lies. We can, on the other hand, think that practicing truthfulness will leave us more vulnerable to our enemies and leave us more open to being attacked or manipulated. But like I was saying with metta and truthful speech are very closely linked. If you really practice metta, you'll be more self-reliant and less vulnerable to other people's good or bad opinions about you. Yeah, if you really practice metta, you'll be less open. You'll be less vulnerable to other people's good or bad opinions about you. You'll just be able to be yourself, regardless of what they think of you or what they say about you. You'll be robust and confident. And if you have nothing to hide, nobody can have any power over you in that regard. Yeah, if you've nothing to hide, nobody can have any power over you. Now, there are some caveats. They're already coming in the chat box. So let me just unpack that a little bit more. So you might not be able for that yet, but it is something worth aiming at. And it's definitely said that, you know, a spiritual practitioner, a really advanced practitioner, hides nothing. You know, they don't feel any need to hide anything from anyone. Now, I think we have to be careful, obviously, of appropriateness. Yeah, so we're still appropriate. So you don't go around telling people things they don't need to hear, or that it wouldn't be appropriate to say to them. So, you know, someone cooks a dinner for you and you say, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I've enjoyed it, rather than, this is the most awful thing I've ever eaten, you know, and you're a terrible cook and I think you're doing it to get me. You know, that's not what you say. That's not truthful speech necessarily. So you are appropriate and kind, and we'll come back to that in a few minutes when we look at it. Kelly is asking in the chat box about past secrets. No, I mean, if someone has asked you to keep a secret and you've agreed to keep a secret, that would be a betrayal of the confidence. So it's not what practicing truthful speech doesn't mean that you just say everything that you have to say. It means that you don't conceal things just for the sake of concealing things, or you don't conceal things just out of habit or out of unskillful motivations, or just because it's more convenient not to. So you try and be as open as you can be, but also guided by appropriateness and I guess fidelity to your friends. Actually, if your friend has told you something that's not appropriate to say, you don't say it, you know. So fidelity is important as well. Let's see, sorry, just lost the page a little bit. 6, there we go, sorry. So the thing about being untruthful is that it cuts us off from other people. It cuts us off from other people when we're not fully truthful, and little white lies can do that. So it might not be appropriate to speak fully openly, but we can try to be a bit more open with people. You know, you don't tell your boss everything that's going on for you, obviously. And even, indeed, you might tell people, you might not want to tell people things that that you know they will use against you. So even in the spiritual community, there are times when I wouldn't say things because I know that person would misuse that. Even in the spiritual community, people are imperfect, you know, shocking and all as that is. But yeah, but what I would say is try and be more open. Take a risk at times in your communication, and don't if you can't find anything nice to say, as my mother used to say to us growing up, don't say anything at all, or change the subject, or be tactful, you know. So truthful speech doesn't mean that you're allowed suddenly to be unkind. Yeah. Yeah, just to remind you, if you've nothing to hide, nobody has any power over you. So the truth can't be used as a weapon against you. Yeah. So Sam has just reiterated that in the chat box. So we're not going to do it now, but Subhadramati has a really good reflection that you might like to do in her book. And I should say that each of the precepts, each of these guidelines has a reflection and a practice in the book. So I'll just read that out. So what she says is, I really like this, I have to say. It's a reflection. What do you hide? So what you do is you sit and you get comfortable again, you tune into a sense of well-wishing for yourself, and you bring to mind something that you've never said to anyone in your life, or something that you don't want to ever tell anyone. Yeah. And you think about what it might be like to tell that to someone appropriate, obviously. And how would you feel? Could you imagine yourself physically saying that to the person? And how might it feel to be able to actually say that to people? And again, like the guilt we were talking about earlier on, often things that we really don't want to share are things that feel terrible to us. But often once we share them, they seem a lot less burdensome. And again, people's, like, if I've shared things, or if I've shared things, or other people have shared things with me, or in a group I'm in, or whatever, usually what they think is, I can't tell you this or you won't like me. And then when you hear it, it's like, what's the problem? That's just such a small thing. Yeah, I do that as well, you know, but it can feel so big to us. But when we share it, then we get a perspective on it. So her reflection is, what do you hide? And imagining telling something that you really don't want to say to people, to someone, obviously someone appropriate, if you have someone you can tell that to. And you might like to actually, after imagining doing that, do that. So that's a reflection you might try out this week. Obviously be careful and appropriate, but I'd also encourage you to take a chance as well. I realize that's contradictory, being careful and take a chance, but push yourself a little bit in this regard. So that's the speech precept of abstaining from false speech and to practice truthfulness. So if you have any comments on it, obviously just do say it in the chat box. I see that Kieran has something else written there in the Mairead. I'll come back to those in a minute. Yeah. So let's go back to the sharing. The next guideline, then, the next precept is to abstain from harsh speech, or to practice kindly speech. So this again is a application of metta. So what you're trying to do is to bring metta into your speech more explicitly. Speaking harshly means giving voice to ill will, giving voice to irritation, giving voice to hatred in your speech. And usually it's like, an anarchy comment. Usually it's maybe complaining about someone to them. It might be expletives. It might be being really sarcastic in an unpleasant way. It might be, non-verbal in some ways, like sighing behind their back. raising your eyes to heaven. I mean, that would be a form of speech, I think, a form of, really what you mean by speech is communication here in the very broad sense. And can even mean swearing, you know, so swearing often is a sign of, you know, that you're coarsening your speech, and it limits your vocabulary. So it might be you want to practice as a precept not swearing this week, you know. I think the real skill here is to work out, if you do have to say something unpleasant to someone, or something that they don't want to hear, well, is it a legitimate grievance or not? You know, is it something they need to hear? And Buddha had criteria for that, which I'll come back to when we look at all 4 precepts, because it's good to look at the 4 first. But are we in the love mode, I guess? Are we doing it out of a sense of well-wishing and connection? That's the real thing. So kindly speech then is speech informed by metta, speech informed by loving kindness. And a very traditional practice in Buddhism is rejoicing in people's merits, it's called. So saying to them the things you really appreciate about them. Yeah, and this goes right back to the Buddha. I mean, there's an incident where the Buddha is dying. He dies of food poisoning at the age of around 80. And his main attendant, who is his cousin, who's like still working towards enlightenment, is really upset by the fact that the Buddha is going to die. And the Buddha calls him to him. And in front of the whole Sangha, which is probably hundreds of monks at this stage, monks and nuns, he rejoices fulsomely in Ananda's qualities. Ananda is the man, his attendant. And he talks about how brilliant he is at this, how good he is at that. And it's all true. You know, it's all like rejoicing in merits isn't making things up. It's really seeing firstly, and then communicating the great things about that person, you know. So we need to rejoice in people. We're probably quite good at complaining about people a lot of time, but we do need to be able to rejoice in people. And I think if you're going to give people feedback, if you're going to be a person who is critical of people, you also need to be the kind of person who is able to rejoice in people. If you can only be critical, it's one-sided, and you need to really look at that. Yeah. If you can't rejoice in people, you need to look at that. Yeah. So one of the practice suggestions again this week by Subhadra Mati for this precept is on page 75, and she talks about rejoicing in merits. So you bring to mind a person you get on well with. Maybe keep it really simple, like in the Metta Bhavana, maybe, you know, someone you're not romantically attracted to or whatever, just initially. And just think about things that you really like about that person. Something that you think they do well, a good quality they have, and just dwell with that, stay with that, not out of any kind of jealousy, but just really rejoicing in that person. And then you can even move on to think about good qualities in people that you don't like. And that can help you get over your dislike of them, or get you back in touch with your like of them. Like often, as I said, it's family members or friends that end up in the difficult person stage of the Metta Bhavana. So think of good qualities that they have. And you might even, after this reflection, like to send them a little card or a gift or whatever is appropriate in these COVID times, you know. And just see if it changes your relationship with them. So rejoicing is a really, really powerful practice. And whenever we have any significant step in our community, like becoming a mitra, you know, becoming more committed to Buddhism, becoming ordained, you're always very fulsomely rejoiced in by people, or you usually rejoiced in by people. And it's a really important part of the Buddhist tradition to rejoice in people. So you might like to take that on as a practice. Now, we don't quite have time now, but if I had time on the course, what I do now is get you to pair up and rejoice in a good friend to each other. Yeah. But maybe you want to try that out yourself at home. Yeah. Okay, feel free to put in any comments if you have any, again. The next ethical guideline then, to do with speech, is avoiding or abstaining harsh speech and instead practicing meaningful speech. I'm sorry, that should be useless speech. Sorry, that's a typo. My apologies for that. So that should be, let me just really quickly change that. It'll just take a second. Sorry about this. Okay. Okay, so as I said, the next one is to abstain from useless speech. So this is speech that serves no real purpose. Yeah. So in the Buddha's time, he said that there must be about 32 kinds of useless speech. And nowadays there must be 32,000 kinds of useless speech, you know. So with the proliferation of the phone, with the internet, with all kinds of online activity, Twitter, Facebook, there's so much useless speech going on out there. Obviously not all of it is useless, but you know, how many of us as well, when we go to a cafe, then pull out our phones and put it in front of us, or have a conversation while having another conversation on WhatsApp with our friend, you know? So there's so much useless speech out there. There's so much stuff that doesn't need to get said. And what we're trying to do really is move from speech that is useless to speech that is meaningful, yeah? To speech that is really connecting and connected. And I think the main thing we need to do to avoid useless speech is look at our minds, actually. So our minds are usually very choppy. We take in so much stuff that we're processing all that information. And so our speech then tends to be informed by that and tends to be a bit empty, actually, a lot of the time. So one of the main things here, and I think one of the main things I'd really encourage you to do this week, is to reduce your input. Reduce your input. Have periods of time where you can allow your mind to digest all that it's already taken in without pouring in more stuff on top of it. I think one of the main reasons that people get distracted in meditation is because they just don't give themselves any chance during their day to do nothing and to just let their minds catch up with all the input that they've had to digest all that. If you spent like 20 minutes, half an hour, or even 10 minutes a day doing nothing and letting your mind just process it all and then sit down to meditate, your meditation will go a lot better. Yeah. And also your speech would be a lot more meaningful. It'd be a lot less informed by the garble of stuff that's inside us. And I think often we think that when we come home from work or we get time off, we need to unwind or relax by taking in some junk input. But actually, even though it's a bit painful initially, the best thing to do is often to do nothing or just have a cup of tea and look out a window and reflect a bit, you know? And also in terms of useless speech, well, are we really enriched by going onto the comment sections of, I don't know, newspapers or forums online and things like that? Do we really need to get into an argument with another anonymous person on the internet, you know? There's a famous cartoon from a few years ago where, you know, I think a partner is asking her husband, are you going to come to bed? You know, it's late. And he's on the computer typing away and he goes, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Someone on the internet is wrong. You know, the implication being that they're going to try and correct them before they go to bed. So like the joke being that it's endless, you know? So does it enrich us to always be engaging in useless speech? And can we try and move towards more meaningful speech? Can we move away from gossip, for example? Can we move away from that kind of thing and just try and bring communication deeper when we meet people? So I'd really encourage you to practice. This is one of Subhadramati's practice suggestions to reduce input this week. You know, when you're walking to the bus, do you need to listen to music or can you just enjoy the bird song? Do you really need to read one of the free newspapers? I'm not sure if they're giving them out anymore. Probably not on the bus. Can we switch off our phones at 10 o'clock at night and not be online after that point? Things like that. What's our kind of mental hygiene around this, you know? And then afterwards, when you do this, is it worth it or not? Is it worth it or not? Yeah. Okay, and then the last one then is the last speech precept is abstaining from slanderous speech. So, oh God, I've made another typo there. Sorry, that should be harmonious speech. My God, I had to do the notes in a little bit of a hurry this evening. I actually forgot to do them and then I had to do them in a hurry. There's mindfulness for you. But anyways, we're trying to avoid slanderous speech. So we're trying to avoid like nasty gossip, creating stories about people. Often we do it to get people on our side so that we'll side with us against them. And just being aware that all of these things have an effect on us. They separate us from other people. And we wouldn't like ourselves to be slandered, or we wouldn't like our partner or our best friend to be slandered. So instead, we're trying to create harmony by, you know, just trying to bring people together, trying to speak in a way that connects us with people rather than disconnects us. There's a lot more that could be said about that, but I'll just move on from that. The last thing then to be said, and I'll stop talking, is the Buddha gave guidelines about feedback. You know, when we feel that we do actually need to speak out about something, that we can't stay silent, but the person may or may not want to hear that. So he said, is it true? So is it true? And one of the ways we establish if it's true is by checking it with other people first that know the situation. Because often actually it's not true. It's just a story in our heads. You know, that thing of that person is doing that to annoy me. Yeah, often that isn't true, actually. They're just unaware, you know. Is it beneficial for them to hear this, you know? So is it going to be useful? Is it beneficial for them to hear this? Will it actually help them? You know, sometimes I remember a friend of mine saying, after I give a talk, you know, he's giving a talk on Buddhism, it is not beneficial for me to hear straight afterwards that that wasn't a great talk. Just tell me it was great, you enjoyed it, and the next morning you can give me the feedback, you know? Or whatever, you know, he said, I can't remember exactly how he put it, but it was something like that. Yeah. So is it beneficial for the person? If it's going to just destroy their confidence and be really knock them down, then it might not be worth saying it to them. Yeah. And if it is true and beneficial, and also kind, I think should be in there as well. You do it at an appropriate time. You do it at an appropriate time. I think if it's kind, the kindness should be there in how you deliver it in terms of beneficial. So if so, you give it to them at an appropriate time when they're going to really be able to hear it and take it in. You don't have to say it straight away. Yeah. And it doesn't matter, the Buddha said, if they want to hear it or not. If those other criteria are satisfied, then it's probably worth saying. Yeah. So that's the Buddha's guidelines on having to say things that you don't want to, that people may not want to hear. Okay, there's an awful lot there, and I don't want to go on keep talking about speech, but do pop your questions in the chat box. So Helena has asked a long question. So about false speech. If someone is asking questions in a way that's overstepping boundaries, if they're too personal or so on, or the person's motives are not from care or the potential of purpose. Well, I think that truthful speech, I mean, in a way you've got all four guidelines, and also you got not causing harm. So you might, like, I don't think you should play into someone's games if that's what they're doing. You could change the subject. You could say, I'm not sure if I want to answer that, actually, it's a bit personal. That would be fine. That doesn't necessarily mean it's untruthful speech. If you're saying, I don't want to speak about that right now, that is truthful speech, isn't it? If that's what you're feeling. Or it might be that you, if you're very skilled and brave, you could say, so why is it you want to know about that? If you could do it in a kind of way. So don't be very one-dimensional about truthful speech, you know, don't be, you know, it's subtle and it's nuanced, you know what I mean? So we can be a bit, don't take it too literally, I guess. Taking things literally is the death of ethics. And sometimes, you know, the example I give with truthful speech is sometimes it might be necessary to lie. You know what I mean? So the classic example is, you know, you're in occupied German territories in World War II. You've got Jewish people in your basement that you're hiding. You know, the Nazis come to the door and you say, of course, no, I don't have any Jewish people here, you know? So if you're in that situation, you're allowed to lie. If you're not in that situation, you know, don't rationalize it too easily. You know what I mean? Try, if you can, to live truthfully, and you'll feel a lot more, life will be simpler and more relieved. And if your speech being truthful does cause difficulties, like in Helena's example, I mean, sometimes it will make you more unpopular, actually, but at least you'll have lived according to your ethical principles, you know? I hope that's answered your question, Helena. Do pop any more questions in. Just to go back a little earlier, Mairead said, have a box of CDs to give to Oxfam Books. That's great. Kieran is thinking of giving away all his clothes to charity and live as a Buddha. You know, recommend only one change of clothes. I'm not sure how practical that is. Take it easy, Kieran, because it's a classic thing to do, to give away all your possessions. Well, not classic, but it has happened where people have given away everything in a fit of inspiration and then really regretted it afterwards. So maybe just try one thing first and see how you get on, and then you can give another thing again. The spiritual life is a marathon rather than a sprint, okay? So you can ramp up to things slowly and gradually, and you know, see how you get on, see how you get on. Do send in any other questions if you have them. So really, so the home practice then, and I'll just say what I was going to say then. So, in terms of the home practice this week, read chapter 4, or at least read the bits that we've covered, the up until the end of the speech precepts. You can go on further if you want, but we will be covering the rest of the information next week. It's a long chapter, so really don't feel any pressure to read more than the bits we've covered so far. You can read chapter 3 as well if you're very diligent. That's about how to approach ethics, but it's not vital. look at your practice of the precepts that we've looked at. I'd really encourage you not to try and do them all. Maybe just focus on one for a day or two, yeah? Just focus on one, because in a way they all come out of each other. If you're really trying to practice truthful speech, the other ones will come out of that as well, yeah? If you're trying to practice generosity, the other ones will come out of that as well, yeah? So look at your practice of the precepts and even just practice one. What I would like you to do is, each precept, as I've said, has a reflection or a practice guide. I would like you to do one of those each day. That's the main homework this week. Do one of those reflections or practice suggestions each day. And it can be the same one each day. It can be a different one each day. I'd encourage you not to stick to the same one the whole week. At least try 2 different ones. And it might be the ones that we've done already, the reflection we did earlier, but try and do one reflection or practice guide each day. Yeah, so that will involve reading the book as well. And I really would like you to record how well you get on with each of these in your notebook. It'd be really interesting to hear next week how you got on. I know in the groups as well, we'll be asking you to share that as well with people. So read chapter 4, at least up until the bits we've looked at. Look at the practice of the precepts, even if you just pick one each day or one for a couple of days. Do some of Subhadramati's practice suggestions, and record how well you get on in your notebook. Yeah, so I'll send you these guidelines as well then. Oh yeah, thank you, Marege. Yeah, and that was one thing that I have in my notes. So we're not here next week. So you have actually got 2 weeks to practice these ethical guidelines. So I'm away next week, unfortunately. And I did toy with the idea, as I said to you before, about getting someone else in. But I think it's better if we leave it and we just stay together as this group. So you'll have 2 weeks. So do read chapter 3 as well, and reread a couple of times, maybe the bits in chapter 4. And really, you could, there's, what was it there? There was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guidelines there. So you could even take on one every 2 days, if you see what I mean, and do the guidelines for that. And we'll meet back in 2 weeks. So this time, 2 weeks, we'll meet back and we'll look at the mind precepts, yeah? Okay, thanks, Kieran. Any other comments or questions on any of this? I think I see some people typing there, so I'll just give it a second. It's also important just to remind you again that these are not rules, and these are not, what's the word, commandments. So these are ways that the Buddha gives to live more freely. Yeah, best of luck with that. Yeah, just remind yourself, watch out for legalism, watch out for martyrdom, watch out for spiritual bypassing and all those things that I talked about at the start, yeah. Okay, so why don't we just do a short reflection or short, maybe just period of just sitting even to end the class, and you can still type in questions if you want. We'll have a few more minutes at the very end if there's any more questions. So why don't we just sit comfortably, closing our eyes. So feeling the breath in the belly, in the chest. And if there's one thing that really struck you tonight, one thing you really want to take away, at least to practice initially, one intention to take away, like maybe not telling little white lies, maybe spending some time each day doing nothing and reducing your input. Just one thing you really want to take away tonight, just bringing that to mind now for a few moments. Strengthening your resolve to remember this. Maybe it's to give something away like we did in the reflection earlier. And then lastly, just deciding how you're going to remember to do the practice tomorrow. How are you going to remind yourself? What time are you going to engage with it tomorrow? What reminders do you need to set up for yourself to do that? And connecting with our resolution to do that. When you're ready, then bringing the reflection to a close, reintroducing movement, opening your eyes. Okay, so that's this week's course.